been terrifying discoveries in deep-sea trenches that challenge modern biological science, there are places on this planet that no human eye was ever meant to witness. Depths so extreme, so removed from the world of sunlight and air and the ordinary, that the creatures living there evolved as if life itself had been rewritten by a completely different author. Scientists have spent decades lowering instruments into these places, and what has returned from below has not simply expanded our understanding of biology. It has, in many cases, quietly dismantled it. What follows is not a list of curiosities. It is a descent into the most biologically strange, the most forbidden, and in several cases, the most deeply unsettling discoveries ever retrieved from the floor of the world. We begin at 10, and we go deeper. Number 10. The Mariana Trench Creatures. The Mariana Trench sits in the western Pacific Ocean, east of the Mariana Islands, and it is the single deepest known point in the ocean. At its lowest measured extent, it drops nearly 11 kilometers below the surface. To understand that number in physical terms, if you place the tallest mountain on Earth inside it, there would still be more than a mile of dark water above the summit. The pressure at that depth is more than 1,000 times greater than at sea level. The temperature hovers just above freezing. There is no light. There has never been light, and yet it is not empty. When researchers first began seriously exploring the deepest regions of the Mariana Trench in the mid-20th century, the expectation was that life would thin out and eventually disappear as conditions became more extreme. That expectation was wrong. What they found instead was an ecosystem. Not sparse, not accidental, but structured, functioning, active. Organisms were not merely surviving in conditions that should have made survival impossible, they appeared, in many cases, to be thriving. The snailfish, a pale, gelatinous creature with translucent skin and a body that appears almost fragile, has been filmed at depths exceeding 8 kilometers. At that depth, the pressure alone would crush a steel ball. The snailfish's body is structured in a way that actually uses the pressure rather than fighting it. Its cell membranes contain compounds that remain functional under forces that would denature the proteins of any surface animal almost instantly. When footage of these creatures was reviewed by marine biologists, the reaction within the scientific community was not celebration. It was something quieter, something closer to unease. Because the question that immediately followed was not how the snailfish survived. The question was, how long has it been doing this? And the answer, when researchers tried to estimate population ages and evolutionary timelines, opened something that science is still not able to close. These animals had been down there, evolving in near-perfect isolation, for timescales that stretch far beyond what the fossil record had suggested for deep-sea life. They are not visitors to this environment. They are its original inhabitants, and they are more ancient than most of what lives on the surface. Number 9. Challenger Deep within the Mariana Trench. There is a specific point called Challenger Deep. It is the deepest known location on the surface of the Earth, and it sits at the southern end of the trench in a section that has been visited by humans a total of fewer times than the surface of the Moon. The first crewed descent took place in Faye, aboard a vessel called the Trieste. The 2 men aboard reported something that was initially dismissed by the broader scientific community and has never been entirely explained. At the bottom, in what should have been a sterile, featureless landscape of compressed sediment, they saw movement, a flatfish, they reported, resting on the seafloor. The scientific establishment at the time was skeptical. At that depth, pressure should have made it biologically impossible for a vertebrate to function. Subsequent researchers proposed the men had seen a sea cucumber instead. The disagreement was never fully resolved, but the record of what was seen at Challenger Deep that day remained in the literature, and it planted a question that later expeditions would try and largely fail. To answer definitively what has been confirmed in Challenger Deep through sediment sampling and remotely operated vehicle footage is something that in some ways is stranger than a single fish. The sediment at the very bottom of Challenger Deep contains organic material. Phytoplankton remnants, fragments of surface life that have drifted down over millennia. But mixed in with this material are microorganisms, bacteria, and single-celled organisms that are metabolically active, consuming nutrients, reproducing, and in several documented cases, belonging to species entirely unknown to science. The deepest point on Earth is not a grave. It is an ecosystem, and parts of it are entirely uncharted. There is something else about Challenger Deep that researchers have noted but rarely discuss in public-facing documentation. The sediment at the bottom contains significant concentrations of pollutants, polychlorinated biphenyls, persistent organic compounds that were introduced into the environment through industrial activity in the 20th century. They were found in creatures at the deepest point on Earth, in concentrations higher than those measured in heavily polluted river systems on the surface. The depth offered no protection, the isolation offered no shelter. Whatever enters the ocean eventually finds its way down, and what that means for the organisms that have spent millions of years adapting to pure, uncontaminated pressure is something science has not yet begun to fully assess. Number 8. Giant amphipods in the deep trenches of the Pacific. Researchers lowering baited traps have retrieved something that continues to disturb marine biologists not for what it is, but for what it implies about life at extreme depths. Amphipods are, in surface waters, tiny shrimp, like crustaceans. Most of them are a centimeter or two in length. In the deep trenches, particularly below 6 kilometers, amphipods have been collected at lengths exceeding 30 centimeters. Some specimens recovered from the Mariana Trench and the Kermadec Trench rival the size of a human hand. This phenomenon is called deep-sea gigantism, and while the term suggests an explanation, it does not actually provide one. The working hypothesis is that cold temperatures slow the metabolism, allowing organisms to grow for longer before reproductive maturity, and that the pressure environment creates different size constraints than those at the surface. But when researchers have examined the growth rates of these deep-sea amphipods, the numbers do not fully align with the hypothesis. Some of these animals appear to have grown to their sizes in shorter time frames than the cold and slow model would predict. There is a stranger dimension to this discovery. The giant amphipods found in deep trenches are often found in enormous numbers. When baited traps are lowered to the abyssal depths and retrieved hours later, they are sometimes packed with hundreds of these animals. That density implies a population size that, given the apparent scarcity of food at that depth, should be impossible to sustain. What the amphipods are eating between the rare occasions when organic material drifts down from above is not fully understood. There is a metabolic gap in the current scientific model, a period of time in which these animals, by all available calculations, should not be finding enough energy to survive, and yet they are abundant, and yet they are large. The trench is feeding something that we have not yet identified as food. This is where the descent changes. Until now, these places felt distant and unreachable, geological curiosities, biological footnotes from the outer edge of the known world. From here on, the discoveries become something different. The organisms change, the implications move closer. What was merely strange becomes, in certain cases, something that quietly challenges the foundational assumptions of how life is supposed to work. Number 7. The deep-sea anglerfish at intermediate depths in waters where sunlight has long since disappeared. But the extreme pressures of the deepest trenches have not yet been reached. There lives an animal whose biology has forced researchers to reconsider what an individual organism actually is. The deep-sea anglerfish is well known for the bioluminescent lure that protrudes from its forehead, a spine tipped with light-producing bacteria that the fish uses to attract prey in absolute darkness. That element of its biology is remarkable, but it is not the part that disturbed scientists most deeply when they finally understood what they were looking at. For years, researchers collecting anglerfish specimens noticed that the females were frequently found with small, withered masses of tissue attached to their bodies. These masses had blood vessels, they had nerve connections. They were, in some sense, alive. Eventually, it was determined that these were the males. The male anglerfish, a fraction of the size of the female, locates a potential mate by following chemical signals through the dark water. When he finds her, he bites into her body, and then his jaw fuses to her flesh. His circulatory system connects to hers. Over time, his eyes atrophy. His internal organs atrophy. He loses his digestive system, his nervous system, his independent existence. He becomes, in biological terms, a parasite, or depending on how you define the term, a permanent attached appendage. The scientific term for this is sexual parasitism, but the mechanism through which it is possible is what makes the discovery genuinely unsettling to immunologists. A normal immune system in any vertebrate animal attacks foreign tissue. It identifies cells that do not belong and eliminates them. The fusion of a male anglerfish to a female should, by every known principle of vertebrate immunology, trigger an immune response that would kill both animals. Instead, it does not. The female's immune system deactivates, not entirely, not globally, but in the precise locations where the male is attached. It accepts him as part of itself. How a fish in the deep ocean evolved a mechanism for localized immune suppression that pharmaceutical researchers have spent decades trying to replicate for use in organ transplantation is a question that has not been answered. It has only been noted quietly and filed alongside the other things that do not fit. Number 6. Bioluminescent species in the ocean's midwater zone. The mesopelagic and bathypelagic layers, something between 70 and 90% of all organisms, are estimated to produce their own light. That estimate, which emerged from large-scale midwater surveys conducted in the last 2 decades, was not what researchers expected when they began the work. The expectation was that bioluminescence would be a specialized adaptation found in certain lineages. Instead, it appears to be the dominant condition. In the deep ocean, light production is not the exception. It is, in terms of sheer numbers of organisms, closer to the rule. What makes this discovery troubling rather than merely interesting is what it implies about the deep ocean as a communication environment. Bioluminescence in deep-sea organisms is not random. It is patterned. Different species produce light in different colors, at different frequencies, in different body locations, and in response to different stimuli. The light patterns function as signals for predation, for defense, for mating, for navigation. The deep ocean, which humans assumed was defined by absolute darkness and silence, is in fact filled with constant, structured biological signaling. It is, in a sense, alive with communication that has been occurring for hundreds of millions of years without any awareness from the surface world. The troubling aspect is this. We have been sampling the deep ocean with equipment that disturbs the organisms around it. The lights of remotely operated vehicles, the noise of descent, the pressure disturbance of approaching instruments. All of these alter the behavior of the creatures being observed. The majority of what bioluminescent deep-sea organisms do in undisturbed conditions has never been recorded. Every observation we have has been taken in the presence of an intrusion. The deep ocean's communication network has only ever been seen in a state of disruption. What it looks like when nothing from the surface is interfering is something we do not yet know. Number 5. Hydrothermal vent life in Faye. A research submersible diving in the vicinity of the Galapagos Rift encountered something that the scientists aboard were not prepared to interpret. At a depth of more than 2 kilometers, in water near freezing, in complete darkness, they found a community of living organisms clustered around fissures in the seafloor from which superheated water was venting. The temperature of the water emerging from these vents exceeded 350 degrees Celsius, and around the base of these structures in the mineral-rich outflow that spread across the surrounding seafloor, there was life, dense, structured, abundant life. The organisms at these hydrothermal vents, tube worms, clams, shrimp, crabs, snails, were not using sunlight. They could not. There was none. They were using a process called chemosynthesis, in which bacteria derive energy from chemical reactions involving hydrogen sulfide, a compound that is toxic to the majority of surface life. These bacteria form the base of an entire food web, one that operates entirely independently of the sun. The implications of this discovery took years for the scientific community to fully process. Until Faye, the assumption embedded in biological science was that life on Earth depended, ultimately, on solar energy. Hydrothermal vent ecosystems demonstrated that this assumption was incorrect. Since that initial discovery, hydrothermal vents have been found in every ocean basin on Earth. The organisms living at them have been studied extensively, and the more thoroughly they are studied, the more unusual they become. Tube worms at deep-sea vents have been estimated to live for more than 200 years. The bacteria that power these ecosystems are among the most ancient evolutionary lineages known. And the vents themselves, the geological structures that make these ecosystems possible, may have been active on Earth for billions of years. Long before complex surface life existed, long before oxygen was a significant component of the atmosphere. The chemistry of hydrothermal vents closely resembles the chemistry that some researchers believe may have existed at the site of life's actual origin. These ecosystems may not simply be unusual. They may be the oldest continuously operating form of life on Earth. Number 4. The vampire squid. It is not, despite its name, a true squid, nor is it an octopus. The vampire squid occupies its own taxonomic order, a solitary lineage with no known living relatives. It is found in the oxygen minimum zone of the deep ocean, a layer of water between approximately 600 and 1,000 meters where dissolved oxygen concentrations drop to levels that most marine life cannot tolerate. The vampire squid does not merely tolerate this zone. It has claimed it as its exclusive territory, exploiting the fact that predators capable of pursuing it cannot survive long enough in low oxygen conditions to hunt effectively. Its physical appearance is structured around darkness. It is deep black or deep red, depending on the angle of observation. Its body is covered in photophores, light-producing cells, which it can activate in complex patterns. When threatened, rather than producing ink the way true squid do, it expels a cloud of bioluminescent mucus. A glowing, disorienting cloud that confuses predators while the animal retreats. The tips of its arms are also bioluminescent. It can, in a sense, erase itself from the darkness it lives in. What is most biologically significant about the vampire squid, however, is its diet. It does not hunt in the conventional sense. It feeds on what researchers call marine snow, the slow, continuous fall of organic particles, dead cells, fecal matter, and decomposing organisms that drifts down from the surface layers above. The vampire squid extends long, fine filaments into the water column and collects this material passively, coating it in mucus and consuming it. In doing so, it occupies a position in the deep-sea food web that has no equivalent in surface ecosystems. It is the deep ocean's custodian of decay, an animal that has survived hundreds of millions of years, with no close relatives anywhere in the ocean, by consuming what everything else has discarded. When researchers modeled the vampire squid's metabolic requirements and compared them to the energy density of its food source, the numbers were marginal. The animal appears to operate at near the absolute minimum energy budget compatible with survival. It is, in biological terms, almost impossibly efficient. The question of how it arrived at this efficiency, how an ancient lineage alone in its order found and perfected this precise ecological role in the lowest oxygen part of the ocean, has no clear answer. What is clear is that it has been doing this, largely unchanged, for an estimated 300 million years. Number 4. Deep-sea jellyfish. If you are standing at the edge of known science and looking into what remains unknown, this is where the landscape begins to shift in ways that do not resolve into familiar shapes. The deep ocean contains jellyfish. This is not surprising. What is surprising is the nature of certain species found at depth and what their behavior and physiology imply about the boundaries of biological possibility. The giant phantom jellyfish, Stygiomedusa gigantea, is one of the least observed large animals on Earth. It has been encountered fewer than 120 times across all documented scientific expeditions. It reaches lengths of more than 10 meters. It has no tentacles in the conventional sense. Instead, it has 4 thick, ribbon-like oral arms that trail behind it in the darkness, acting as both feeding structure and sensory apparatus. In the footage that exists of this animal, it moves through the water with a quality that is difficult to describe in purely mechanical terms. It appears in some footage to drift with a kind of intentionality that is inconsistent with what researchers understand about jellyfish cognition. There is a broader category of concern here. Beyond any single species, jellyfish lack a brain. They lack a centralized nervous system in any form comparable to what is found in more complex animals. What they possess is a nerve net, a diffuse network of neurons distributed throughout the body without any central processing structure. And yet, certain deep-sea jellyfish demonstrate behaviors that, if observed in an animal with a conventional brain, would be described as goal-directed. Avoidance of specific conditions, coordinated movement responses to stimuli that appear to be evaluated rather than simply reflexive. The theory of distributed cognition, the idea that intelligence and decision-making need not be centralized in a single organ, has been discussed in biological and neuroscience communities for decades. Deep-sea jellyfish are among the organisms that make this theory feel less theoretical. Whatever is happening in the nerve net of a deep-sea jellyfish in total darkness at extreme depth is something that neuroscience does not currently have adequate tools to fully characterize. The absence of a brain does not appear in these animals to mean the absence of something brain-like. Number 2. Unknown microbial life. This is where the science stops being strange and begins to feel, to those who study it closely, like something that was not meant to be found this quickly. Beneath the ocean floor, not in the water column, not at the sea floor surface, but inside the rock and sediment itself, meters and in some cases kilometers below the bottom of the ocean. There are microorganisms. They are metabolically active. They are reproducing. They have been carbon dated, and their lineages suggest that some microbial communities in the deep subsurface have been isolated from the rest of Earth's biosphere for millions of years, in some cases for hundreds of millions of years. The deep subsurface biosphere, as researchers now call it, may contain a larger total mass of biological material than all life on the surface of the Earth combined. That estimate has been contested, revised, and recontested. The range of current scientific consensus places subsurface microbial life as representing between 1 and 2/3 of all microbial life on Earth. The organisms in this biosphere live in conditions of near-zero energy input. Their metabolic rates are so slow that the distinction between living and geological process begins to blur. Some of these organisms are estimated to divide, to reproduce once every 10,000 years. They exist in a state that has no equivalent in surface biology. Not dormant, not dead, simply operating on timescales that make the concept of a lifespan functionally meaningless. Among the species retrieved from subsurface sampling, there are organisms that do not belong to any known taxonomic group, not unknown species within known genera, not unusual variants of characterized lineages, organisms that represent biological branches with no identified relationship to any other known life. Their metabolic pathways use chemistry that has no parallel in surface biology. Their cell structures contain molecules that researchers are still working to characterize. They have been alive in the rock beneath the ocean for geological spans of time, and they were entirely unknown to science until we drilled far enough down to find them. The implications of this are not fully understood. What is understood is this: the majority of life on Earth may not live on the surface. It may not need sunlight or oxygen or moderate temperature or any of the conditions that surface biology depends on. The deepest layer of life on this planet is not a subset of the biosphere. It may be the biosphere is foundation, and it has been there in the rock and the darkness for longer than complex surface life has existed. We have been studying life on Earth for centuries, and we may have been looking at only the most recent and the most visible fraction of what is actually here. Number 1. The bloop on the 1st of August 1997, the United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's hydrophone array, a network of underwater microphones originally deployed across the Pacific Ocean for the purpose of monitoring submarine activity, recorded a sound. The sound was unlike anything in the existing library of known ocean acoustic phenomena. It was extraordinarily powerful. Its amplitude was sufficient that it was detected simultaneously by sensors separated by nearly 5,000 kilometers. It originated, as best as the directional analysis could determine, somewhere in the deep South Pacific, in a region of open ocean above some of the deepest water on the planet. The sound became known as the bloop. It was not a simple tone. It was a complex frequency, modulated signal with a rapidly rising profile over approximately 1 minute. NOAA's official analysis, released years after the original recording, concluded that the sound was most likely produced by icequake activity. The cracking and fracturing of large Antarctic ice shelves. This explanation has been accepted by most of the scientific community. What the explanation does not fully account for is the biologically oriented nature of the signal's profile. Multiple marine bioacousticians who reviewed the original recording noted that the frequency modulation of the bloop, the pattern of how its pitch changed over time, closely resembles the modulation patterns found in the vocalizations of large biological organisms. Baleen whales, the largest animals known to produce low-frequency sound, produce signals with a different signature profile. The bloop's profile fell outside the known range of any characterized biological sound producer. This does not mean it was biological, but the acoustic structure was noted and the note was not dismissed. What would need to exist in the deep ocean to produce a sound of that amplitude, if it were biological in origin, would need to be substantially larger than any known living animal. The scale of the signal, if produced by a living organism, implies a body size that has no precedent in the paleontological record since the Mesozoic. This calculation has been made privately by more than one researcher. It has not been formally published as a claim. It remains a number that exists in notes and in conversations among specialists, attached to a recording that has never been fully explained to the satisfaction of everyone who has listened to it carefully. The bloop has not been heard again. Whatever made it, whether geology or something else, returned to the silence of the deepest ocean and did not repeat itself. The hydrophones are still active. They are still listening, and the floor of the Pacific, in the region where the sound originated, has never been fully explored. Its deepest sections remain unvisited. Its geological structures have been mapped only by echo, by sound sent down and reflected back. No camera has ever reached those depths in that location. No instrument has ever rested on that specific sea floor. What sits at the bottom, in the place where the sound came from, is unknown. It may remain unknown. Some things that exist in the deep ocean were not found late because we lacked the technology. They were found late or not yet found at all. Because the ocean is larger than our methods, older than our science, and quieter than anything we know how to listen to properly. What remains below is not simply unexplored. In the deepest zones, in the final regions where pressure becomes structural, where biology becomes something the surface world has no vocabulary for, where the sediment contains records of life that predate the existence of the continents above them, what remains is not the edge of the known. It is the beginning of something that discovery, so far, has only grazed. This was only one layer of what the ocean holds. The deeper layers were never intended for the surface world. And the organisms in them, the ones already found and the ones that have not been, have had hundreds of millions of years to decide what they are before anything from above arrived to ask. If you have watched this far, you have already gone further than most people choose to go. What comes next? In this channel goes further still. Tank's mystery. The knowledge that stays hidden isn't waiting to be found. It is waiting to see who keeps looking.